The forests of Northern Europe are dominated by super societies. Thousands of interconnected wood ant mounds spread across the landscape with the power to shape ecosystems. Each year, biologists and documentarians tackle these European empires and learn invaluable information about the structure, warfare, and medicine of their super colonies. Luckily, there are mound-building ants in North America, and we are here to unlock their secrets. I'm Miles Maxcer, myrmecological detective, biologist, and adventurer. I've been keeping ants for over a decade and seeking out intriguing insects for even longer.
Check this out.
Follow me as we discover the hidden secrets of the undergrowth. We're headed down the St. Joe River right along the border of Idaho and Montana, and we're looking for one of my favorite ants. Thatching ants dominate many landscapes. Their mounds are key features of the region, and finding them is a common occurrence. In my early years, I encountered countless wood ants throughout the Rocky Mountains. The locals along this river live in relative peace with the ants, and it seems almost everyone has a story or two of finding enormous nests in their explorations. Given these factors, my search into this rich Idahoan forest should be a walk in the park. I start in some woods up the bank of the river. Unfortunately, my early confidence wanes as the six-legged colonists prove more elusive than I thought possible. We spotted this mound up on the trail and it looked pretty promising, but now that we're down on it, it makes sense why the ants aren't here. There's not nearly enough vegetation to provide the insects that they eat, and this mound's covered in moss. We have got to find a mound ant nest. With no nests in sight, my mission to find American mound ants may fail before it gets off the ground. It seems that no matter where I look, even under the most promising rocks, there's not a single Formica worker to be found. Nothing under the bark either. Well, this site checks some of the boxes. There's plenty of pine needles around and there's lots of foliage, but it doesn't get enough sunlight and the ground is too moist. We're gonna have to keep looking. It feels like everything in this forest is working against me. An entire day of fruitless anting later, it's time to turn back toward camp. Sleeping after such an immense failure will not be easy. It's been a long and frustrating day. We've tried multiple sites. We found some pretty good habitat, some interesting ant colonies, but no wood ants to be found. So we're gonna have to call it a night, but we're gonna try again tomorrow. Well, it's day 2. We're gonna drive down along the river and hopefully we can identify some better habitat where the mound ants might be nesting. We have been seeing some workers walking along here, but that's not necessarily helpful because they can forage up to 100 meters from the home colony. So just because we see some, doesn't really mean that the nest is nearby. So I was just taking in the view along the river and I saw some workers walking along here and they led up to this small colony. The workers are just foraging right along through here. And a beautiful small thatching ant nest right here. I've never seen one this small. And it makes sense because this really is not prime habitat. There's not gonna be a lot of food around this area, so the nests are gonna stay small along this riparian area. During the heat of the day, the ants actually duck down into the nest because the ground around here gets so warm. But right now, the workers are able to tolerate the heat and they're out foraging. As the sun bakes down on the nest and surrounding area, I notice that the ants are doing something peculiar. Their behavior suddenly becomes manic. The ants are wildly climbing the grass blades nearest to them. I've seen this behavior once before, in the high desert of southern Arizona. There, honeypot ant workers will scramble up the vegetation during the heat of the day, When the ground temperature was taken in the desert, we were shocked to see that it was nearly 50 degrees Celsius, or close to 122 Fahrenheit. Even a few centimeters off the ground, the temperatures plummeted to the upper 30s, or about 103 degrees F. Could it be that the mound ants are trying to cool off in the breeze, just as their desert relatives do? So far, my investigation has created more questions than answers. It's just so encouraging to see a mound ant colony coming along the river. Just so awesome to see these in person out here. While this little colony is a great sign, it's not the metropolis I'm hunting for. To discover the true nature of these ants, I decide to cross the border into Montana, where I can track down a real monster nest. Just recently, I received a tip from a friendly mountain biker. He said that near a clearing on a particular trail up the canyon, there's a place where someone buried a dog. According to him, in front of the dog's grave lies an enormous wood ant mound. This could be the precise tip we need to unearth the ants' secrets. The biker said that we would find the ants in a meadow, and this one looks just like what he described. And in fact, there's the gravesite right over here. Well, this is definitely the huge mound that he was talking about. It's got to be wider than my wingspan even. These are not the normal thatching ants that we're looking for that create the big tall mounds out of pine needles and grasses. This is actually a black Formica species, and they're known for their mounds to be really wide and kind of crater-like even. This is a huge nest, a great example of an awesome Formica, but this is also not the species we're looking for. They are a good indicator though that the region could support large ant nests. So let's scan the area and hopefully we can find some thatching ants. I spotted this downed log over here, and they can usually be pretty good places to try and find some ants. Yeah, here's some Formica workers. All right, this is not the thatching ant species, but these are slave raiding Formica, and they're not very far from the gravesite that's just over there. I bet that these Formica will actually raid the black Formica species and take their brood. What's fascinating about slave makers is that they actually go and steal the brood of another colony and then raise them as their own. And then those workers end up being kind of the slaves or the servants for the colony. Here's another monster Formica nest. This meadow seems to be filled with lots of ants interacting with each other. This meadow and countless others in western North America are dominated by a conglomerate of Formica species, each with unique life stories that connect in a complex interaction web that we are only beginning to understand. In this shot alone, we can observe 7 Formica colonies, including slave raiders, social parasites, and host species. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave those stories for another time and head down the trail to try and find some thatching ant colonies. We must be getting close. Here they are, the thatching ants of North America. We have been trying so hard to find these, and there's just tons of workers walking all along through the branches. Would you look at that? Check this out. It's a huge mound. So this is a huge mound nest for this region, and there are just hundreds of workers all crawling over the surface. After days of searching across the Northwest, I have finally found a worthy wood ant mound. These workers are bringing back all kinds of insect carcasses, which they use as the protein food source to feed their growing brood. A colony of this size can harvest hundreds of insects per day, including caterpillars, flies, grasshoppers, beetle larvae, and more. But if the insects are food for the larvae, what do the worker ants do for sustenance? The answer lies here. Only a few yards from the main colony, the ants are tending aphids. These aphids are producing a sweet, sugary substance called honeydew. And that is what powers the colony. I have no doubt that this is one of the most impressive aphid farms I've seen here in the Rocky Mountains. Ant and aphid relationships are incredible, and they are a classic example of a symbiotic relationship. The workers protect the aphids from insect predators, and in return, reap the rewards of a consistent, high-energy food source. With honeydew-filled gasters, the ants return to the colony. There are dozens of workers climbing up and down this tree, and what I'm noticing is that this entire side seems to be covered in resin. Well, we know that the wood ants in Europe collect resin to actually help keep bacteria and mold from growing in their nest. I'm really curious to see if maybe these workers are also collecting some resin for their colony. Thatching ant mounds like this represent a pinnacle of social insect evolution. While there is much that we can learn at the surface, to uncover more hidden secrets from these ants, we have to descend down into the nest. Because of the time of year that we are visiting these ants, there is no brood present in the colony. However, they are still actively foraging and bringing insect prey back to the nest to shore up their reserves for the long winter ahead. We can also see that there are indeed pieces of resin from the nearby pine trees embedded in the nest environment. As the ants walk over them, they sometimes apply formic acid, which mixes with the resin and creates an incredible natural antibiotic. This keeps the nest free of pathogens and other microorganisms that could harm the colony. Mound ants are one of the most impressive examples we know of a superorganism. And these ants are some of the most important predators in forest ecosystems like this. My journey to find the elusive wood ants of North America took me along the rivers of northern Idaho and into western Montana's expansive pine forests. Along the way, I encountered dozens of incredible ant species, each with their own unique stories. But the reason I sought out this variety lies in its unique value to science. We know that wood ants serve critical roles in European forests, and it's time that we turn our attention to their relatives here in North America. Thanks for joining me on this journey. If you want to see more Ant Explorer adventures, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, and maybe even leave us a comment down below.